friends, I'm Sarah. Welcome back to my channel, Sunset Bow Tarot. So I wanted to do a anti-haul video, and I have to give credit for Lisa from Supportive Tarot. She was the first person that I saw do an anti-haul video in the tarot community, and I 100% got the idea from her, and so I've been gradually making notes on my own anti-haul ever since I saw her do her first one, which is several months back. She's done another one more recently, so I'll link both of those in the box below. I think it's just a great idea. So the basic premise of the anti-haul is decks you're not going to buy. So instead of showing a bunch of decks you did buy, you talk about the ones you're not going to buy and why. And again, I do want to make sure that I say, you know, that and this is something that Lisa said in her videos as well, you know, decks that I've chosen not to buy, I've just chosen not to buy because they're not for me. It doesn't mean that they're not for other people. It doesn't mean that the creator didn't do a wonderful job on them. It's just that there's some reason why I don't think that they would work for me, or I think that that niche that they might fill in my collection is already filled by a different deck. And where that is the case, I am going to talk about it, where I do feel like I'm not going to get a particular deck because there is a deck that I already have or am expecting that I feel like will fill that particular niche. So I do want to say that this is not intended as any shade on any decks or any deck creators. Probably for anyone watching this, a deck that you love will be on this list, and it doesn't mean that it's a bad deck or there's anything wrong with it. It's just that it's not for me, and I'll tell you the reason why it's not for me. The first deck that I'm going to talk about in my anti-haul is a deck that I actually thought that I was going to get until I saw some actual videos of it when it first came out, and that is the Radiant Wise Spirit Tarot. Now, a lot of folks will know that this is a deck that is basically a reprint by Lo Scarabeo / Llewellyn of a version of the RWS deck that was often lovingly referred to as the Dirty Pam. It's basically a Rider-Waite-Smith deck that has a particular style of coloring to it where the colors are very deep, they're very rich, they have a little bit of an aged look to them, and it's a really, really beautiful edition, and I absolutely love the coloring of that edition, and I was totally convinced that I was going to buy it for myself. And then when the deck itself came out, I saw a lot of videos where it looked like it was actually very, very glossy, and I just didn't want to buy a glossy deck. I knew that if I bought a version of the Rider-Waite-Smith, even if the coloring was really beautiful, if the cards were really glossy, I was going to reach for basically any other version of the Rider-Waite-Smith over that one. So I decided not to go ahead and get it. So, you know, some good examples of other versions of the Rider-Waite-Smith that I love the Borderless Centennial Edition of the Rider-Waite-Smith. I prefer that one to the Radiant Wise Spirit, because it's not as glossy. It also has Pixie's original calligraphy on the cards, her original lettering on the cards, as opposed to printed lettering, which the Radiant Wise Spirit has, and it still has beautiful sort of vintagey looking coloring to it. My cat's scratching on her scratching post. Another one that I really love is the Pam's Vintage Tarot, which is another really cool version of the Rider-Waite-Smith that does not come on glossy cardstock and that I absolutely love. So some other versions that I really adore and that I would definitely probably end up picking up before the Radiant Wise Spirit if I were to get it, so I decided not to get that one. Other decks on my anti-haul list are the Baba Studios Alice deck and the Dame Darcy Queen Alice deck. I've talked before about how I am not a fan of Alice in Wonderland decks, and as I have said before, this is not because I don't love Alice in Wonderland. I love the books. I've read them many times. I read them for the first time when I was very young, and they made a massive, massive impression on me, but I find Wonderland as a setting a little bit of an unsettling place to be in. They're great adventure stories, but it's a very, very unsettling place. And so as a tarot deck, I just don't really like tarot decks set in that world. So I don't plan on ever buying any Alice decks. I don't have any Alice Oracles, and I don't have any Alice Tarot decks, even though both the Dame Darcy Alice, Queen Alice deck and the Baba Studios Alice deck look absolutely beautiful. They're just not ones that I'm ever going to end up buying. Now, that said, I own basically every other Baba Studios deck, and I own the Dame Darcy Mermaid Tarot. So again, this is nothing against the creators of those decks. They're amazing deck creators, and I own all of their other creations. It's just Alice decks in particular are just not my cup of tea. So they're just not ones that I'm ever going to end up buying. Now, another deck that I'm never ever going to buy is the Brady Tarot, which is an absolutely amazing looking deck in terms of its artwork. It has a guidebook written by Rachel Pollack. The artwork of the deck is incredible. These lino-cut prints, and it's really, really a beautiful nature-based deck. Each card is represented by a particular animal, and my understanding is that it's really incredibly well thought out, really, really beautiful. But here's the deal. Every card has a keyword on it, and I do not do keywords. I cannot do tarot decks with keywords. If I see a keyword on a tarot deck, I get stuck on the keyword and I can't get past it. And any other interpretations of the deck basically completely fly out of my head. So I actively avoid any decks with keywords. I've bought decks with keywords once or twice in my life, and I trim those keywords right off. But the keywords on the Brady Tarot are incorporated into the artworks. There's no trimming them. They're part of the artwork. So there's just no way I could ever use the Brady Tarot, even though I think it's beautiful and amazing. I do have some really cool animal-based decks in my collection that I absolutely love. So those would include the Anima Mundi Tarot, which I think is wonderful, by Creeping Moon. Also the Naked Heart Tarot by Jillian Wilde. So I do have animal-based decks in my collection, and I don't see the Brady as being a particular need for me, and because it has keywords, I just know that it wouldn't work for me. Another deck that I know is very popular, but that I know I'm never going to buy, is the Goliath Tarot. The thing about the Goliath Tarot is that I think that the artwork looks beautifully done, but I'll never forget the first time I ever saw the cover of the box. And if you're familiar with the cover of the box, it has two deer on it who have facial piercings and are barfing bugs. And I remember the first time I ever saw that, the first word that came to my mind was edgelord. I was just like, I just don't see this as being for me. And I know it's a very cool deck, but there's a little bit of that like edgelord kind of quality to it, where it seems like it's just purposely like pushing buttons, as opposed to it feels like it wouldn't have anything deep to say to me. It's really just trying to push my buttons. And I know that for a lot of people it does have very deep things to say to them, but it's the kind of deck where I'm like, I would not have a good relationship with you. Like it has a very masculine feel, and it feels like the kind of guy that I would not get along with. So I am not gonna buy the Goliath Tarot. Especially because, again, there are other nature-based decks that I really love, and one that is going to be coming out soon, which I did back on Kickstarter, is the Spacious Tarot. And that is a nature-based deck that looks absolutely up my alley. It has just an amazing feel to the cards that I've seen so far. It was one that I just backed in a complete hurry on Kickstarter, because as soon as I saw some of the images from it, I knew that it was for me. And so I'm really excited about that one. So I think that there are plenty of other nature-based decks in my collection without trying to form a relationship with the Goliath, when I know that we just would not get along. Other decks that I know that I probably wouldn't get along with, the Starchild and the Moonchild Tarot, which I know, again, are very popular decks, and I think they're very beautiful. They're a type of collage that I generally don't find myself relating to very well, which it is odd, because I'm always like, oh, I don't like collage decks. And then I look at the rest of my collection. It's like, oh, well, I have the Textured Tarot. I just recently got the Spolia Tarot, which is very much a collage deck. It's a literally paper, scissors, and glue type of collage in the Spolia Tarot. But I really love the Spolia, and something about me just does not resonate with the Starchild and the Moonchild. I think it has to do with the use of negative space in the Spolia Tarot. It has a very magical feel to me that I don't get that same feel from the Starchild and the Moonchild, so those are ones that are never going to be on my list. So another one that I decided not to buy, and this is one that I actually saw on Lisa's list as well, and her list is what absolutely made me realize that it wasn't for me, is the Slow Tarot. So this is a Kickstarter that came out, and a lot of folks backed it, and it's a very popular deck, and it's a beautiful deck. I mean, it's like these amazingly done paintings that are completely beautifully, gorgeously well done. I mean, it's one of those decks where you know that somebody just labored on the artwork for it for so long, and it's just an unbelievable artistic effort. And every time I looked at the Kickstarter, I was like, oh, that looks really cool, but something about it, I was just like, nah, I don't know if that's for me or not. And then I found out what the devil card in that deck is. And again, this is something I found out from Lisa's video, and that was when I knew that I had made the right decision, because the devil card in that deck is a picture of a woman who is surrounded by all kinds of like sweets and cakes and food. And you know, the idea is that the temptation of the devil is depicted as food in this particular card, and that just is like wildly triggering to me. I cannot handle seeing something like that. Like, I've spent way too much time in my life struggling with weight issues and body image issues and trying to fight the idea that food is the devil, and so I just I knew that card, I just wouldn't be able to handle that kind of card. It's not that I don't think that cards that depict the devil as being, you know, based in material temptations is generally a problem. Like, I don't actually see that as a problem. One deck that has a devil card that I really love is the Efflorescent Tarot, which depicts the devil as being like this heap of stuff almost. It's like the devil is a pile of stuff with like a devil head on top of it. And you can see in this stuff there's all these different material possessions, and it's like the devil is the material stuff that like smothers you and like holds you down, you know? And so it's not that I have an issue with the devil being presented as something material. It's that having the devil be depicted as food specifically, I really, really can't have a card like that in my collection. Like, that just does not work for me. So I'm really glad that I didn't end up backing the Slow Tarot, because I would have ended up having to sell it. So another deck that's come out pretty recently that I know I'm not going to end up buying, even though there's a part of me that really, really wants to buy it. And now I will say that I do reserve the right on any of these to change my mind in the future, but for now, I don't see myself buying it. And that is the Rackham Tarot. So a tarot deck came out, I believe it's a Lo Scarabeo deck, and it's based on the artwork of Arthur Rackham. And I am a massive fan of Arthur Rackham. He's like my favorite illustrator of all time. I absolutely love his artwork. I think a tarot deck based on his artwork would be absolutely incredible. And the reason why I'm choosing not to buy this one is because the last time that happened was last year when Lo Scarabeo came out with the John Bower Tarot. And John Bower is like my second favorite illustrator. My books of fairy tales that I had when I was a kid, I had Grimm's Fairy Tales illustrated by Arthur Rackham, and I had a book of Scandinavian folk and fairy tales illustrated by John Bower. Like, those two artists are the visual of how I imagine fairy tales in my mind. Like, they're my two literally all-time favorite illustrators. But I got the John Bower Tarot deck, and like, I remember flipping through it and going like, oh, I love this artwork so much. It's so beautiful. And then I tried to read with it, and it just didn't work. Like, there were some cards where I wanted to switch the artworks or have a different artwork represent a different card, and I just didn't agree with some of the choices, and it just made it too difficult to read. And I'm very, very worried that I would have the same experience with the Rackham Tarot, so I'm not going to buy that one, even though I love Arthur Rackham with all my heart. So other decks that are on my do not buy list are all the 78 tarot decks. And the reason for that is that I just have a very hard time being interested in any kind of collab deck. I like consistency in the artistic style of my decks. It's just something that I find appealing, and it's important to me. And so collab decks, I look at them and they feel so visually overwhelming to me to see all of these different cards that have completely different artistic styles, and it just stresses me out. So I don't see myself ever buying any of those decks because they are collab decks. Now, obviously, I have other decks that are based on artwork where the artwork is all done by different people. So examples of that might be the Victorian Romantic Tarot, or the Victorian Tarot by Taroko Studio, or heck, any of Cat Black's decks. You know, they're all based on existing artworks, and those artworks were done by all different people. But the artwork all has a consistent theme, like it has a consistent aesthetic, and I feel like I need that consistency of an aesthetic in a deck for me. Otherwise, I find it just too visually overwhelming. So, so again, the 78 tarot decks are just not on my to buy list. Another deck that again is a super popular deck, and it looks absolutely stunningly beautiful, and I had a strong temptation to buy it for a little while, is the True Black Tarot. And again, I think that deck is absolutely beautiful. There's something very very interesting to me in that imagery, and very dreamlike in the imagery, and so I think it's incredibly beautiful, but it does feel kind of distancing as a tarot deck. It feels a little bit like I'm looking at something that's on display as opposed to looking at an image that I can be part of. So because of that, even though I think it's an absolutely stunning deck, it's that distancing feel. Every time I've like watched a full flip through of that deck, I felt a little bit like I have no like emotional connection to anything that's going on in any of the cards, and so because of that, I feel like it would probably be a pretty hard deck for me to read. And of course, it's an expensive deck. It's like a very high quality deck. It's beautifully done, so it's just one of those ones where I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be able to read with it, and so I haven't bought it. Again, it doesn't mean I don't like, for example, dark themed tarot decks, because the Darkness of Light tarot is a tarot deck that I absolutely love. But again, in that deck, even though it is very much based on a dark aesthetic, even though it's very much based on the interplay of light with the figures in the picture, similarly to the True Black Tarot, there isn't that like diorama feel. There isn't that sort of like frozen feel to the images. The images just feel more alive, and they feel more like you're part of them. And so, you know, so that's why I would tend to choose something like the Darkness of Light for that dark aesthetic over the True Black. Another deck that's just, again, I've seen around, and I know a lot of people really enjoyed this one, but it just never made my to buy list, is the Starman Tarot. And you guys, I freaking love David Bowie, but the aesthetic of that deck just was too much for me. It was just, again, too visually overwhelming. And again, you know, I like decks that have a lot of color. I like decks that, you know, that I think might seem kind of busy to some people, but that one was just too much. You know, like the Prism of Visions, for example, is a deck that I absolutely love. I own a copy of it, and I really like it. And I really like that sort of swirling color of it, and you know, it doesn't feel visually overwhelming to me, whereas the Starman was just like too much. So that's another one that I just don't see myself ever buying. So finally, here are a couple of decks that I did actually buy and then ended up regretting and passing on. So one of those is the Revival Art Tarot, and I don't know why I couldn't connect to that deck. It's absolutely stunning, and it's 100% the kind of deck that I should love. But there was just something about it that I just didn't connect to it. I don't know why. Again, I did end up passing that deck on. I sold that deck to somebody else, and it's stunningly beautiful. Those Taroko Studio decks are absolutely such high quality. That deck was beautifully made. I felt like the artwork was really well chosen, but something about it just felt really cold to me. And again, I do have some decks in my collection that I feel like have some slightly similar artwork. An example of that would be the Victorian Romantic, which I absolutely love. And I knew that that would be a deck that I would reach for before I would reach for the Revival Art Tarot. So I ended up passing that one on. It was a deck that I wanted to love so badly, and it just felt like it was going to be just what I wanted. And it just wasn't, and I wish I knew why, but I couldn't connect to it. Again, I reserve the right to potentially buy this deck again someday if I decide that it would work for me. Another one that I actually did buy that I did decide that I wanted to pass on is the Roots and Wings Oracle. What I've realized about Oracle decks is that I already have too many Oracle decks. I am just more of a tarot person than an Oracle person, and I have plenty of Oracle decks, and I just don't need more of them because I don't make enough use of the ones that I already have. So again, when I got the Roots and Wings Oracle, I was like, oh, this is really pretty. I have other Oracle decks though that I'm going to reach for before I reach for this one, and so I decided that I was going to go ahead and pass it on. And in fact, I'm like planning to place a little bit of a moratorium on myself buying more Oracle decks because I just don't use them enough. And you know, the ones that I do use, I don't like read with Oracle decks real consistently, so I need to just work with the ones that I have, that I know that I like and not buy more of them. Another deck that I did buy that I ended up regretting is the Field Tarot. Now I bought this one knowing that there were keywords on it. Because the way that the cards were configured, I knew that if I did end up loving the deck, I could cut off the keywords. But I don't know, the deck just didn't end up speaking to me. It felt a little bit, flat to me. It didn't feel like it just had a ton to say to me. It had this very sort of clean, modern feel to it, which I really liked. But again, there are some other clean modern decks that I like better. An example of that would be like the Fountain Tarot or the Spirit Within Tarot. I also really like. And so, you know, the Field Tarot ended up being one that I just decided to pass along to somebody else. And then finally, some decks that I regret buying that, again, I just did not connect to. The Considerate Cat Tarot and the Cat Tarot by Megan Cott. I don't know why I've had such a hard time in my life finding a cat deck that I truly connect to. As a person who loves cats, I have always wanted to have a cat deck that truly felt like my cat deck, you know? And that's not to say I don't have any cat decks. I have the Mermaid Cat Tarot, which isn't really a cat tarot because it doesn't show cats like behaving like cats. It just shows these sort of fanciful mermaid cat creatures doing the same things that people do in the Rider-Waite-Smith. And then I also have the tiny mini version of the Tarot of the Pagan Cats, which I do like, and I might get a full-size version of that now that they have come out with a borderless version of that deck. We'll see. But the Considerate Cat Tarot and the Cat Tarot, they, again, felt like decks that I should love. I loved the artwork on both of them, and I just thought they were really well done, well-made decks, but I just couldn't connect to either of them, and so I ended up passing them on to other people. They just weren't right for me. So I still dream of that perfect cat deck that I will find someday in the future, but in the meantime, I keep trying them, and I keep failing. So someday the perfect cat deck will come to me. Anyway, that's my anti-haul. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Again, this is not intended as any shade on any deck creators. These are all amazing decks. I just wanted to talk a little bit about why they probably weren't going to find their way into my personal collection, but if they're decks that you love, then that's absolutely wonderful. You know, they're all wonderful decks. It just not for me for whatever reason. So thanks again for watching, everybody. Have a great one. Bye-bye.